Like I said, my name is Rebecca Ratcliffe. I'm so glad you joined us. I'll be facilitating today, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask or come with any issues, please let me know in the chat. You can send me a private message or a group message to all of us. That's also how we'll take your questions about bats. So if you think of something during the middle of the talk, or if you have an idea right now, or if you think of something later on, you can shoot a question in the chat and we'll take a look at it. So I am the Outreach Associate for the Deschutes Land Trust here in Bend, Oregon. The Land Trust is a conservation organization here in Central Oregon, and we protect land throughout the region. We currently protect over 12,000 acres of land for all its wildlife, including bats, for all that it brings to our community and for all of its beauty. So those folks familiar with the Land Trust know that we typically offer guided walks and hikes at our preserves during the spring, summer, and the fall. With our usual calendar of naturalist guided walks and hikes on hold, we are offering virtual events like this one to bring nature of Central Oregon to you. So if you've been enjoying our virtual content in the past or are enjoying this one or enjoy today's talk, please do consider making a small donation to the Land Trust. Your support will help us conserve and protect the nature of our area, and I'll be adding the donation link in the chat for you. One of the exciting things that we did have planned before the world started to change was a bat night with Sarah out at Waichus Canyon Preserve. And while we can't get out there right now, we are so super fortunate to have Sarah joining us today. So she's going to be sharing and giving you a similar experience, though maybe not quite as interactive, learning about some fun bats and sharing about her work while you are in the comfort of your own home. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sarah. She is a biologist and the volunteer coordinator for the Northwestern Bat Hub at OSU Cascades, locally here. She has spent the last 2 summers, and I think this is her 3rd summer, traveling across Oregon, listening for bats of all kinds of habitats. Before starting with the Bat Hub, Sarah worked on wildlife research projects in the Deschutes National Forest and also in Borneo. In her spare time, when she's not traipsing around the state looking for bats, she serves as the social chair for Central Oregon Women in Conservation, a community organization. She has taken an evening out of her busy bat chasing schedule to join us. And so here she is. I will say, welcome, Sarah, if you want to pop on in and tell us a bit more about yourself and your work and all the good stuff.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. This is pretty exciting. I was really looking forward to doing a bat walk, but this is as good as it gets right now. I'm doing a lot of these Zoom interactions with folks, and I'm just so happy to be here. Yeah, so a little bit more about me. I'm actually an East Coast girl who ended up on the West Coast. I've been in Oregon now for about 5 years, the past 3 of them working for the Northwestern Bat Hub. I started there as a seasonal technician, just working a summer doing what we call acoustic monitoring, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. Came back as a crew lead the 2nd summer, and now I'm this kind of in between, all over the place position. I fill in where needed, as needed, but my job does involve a lot of travel. I wasn't expecting to travel as much this year, but it turns out I'm still traipsing all across Oregon. So it's my 3rd summer doing my Grand Oregon tour looking for bats. Yeah, and I think that's about the gist about me.
Super. Well, we are super grateful to have you. I know that you've got some great photos to share, and it looks like just about everyone has joined us in. So if you're just now joining us, we have Sarah Rose, field biologist, Northwestern Bat Hub, OSU Cascades, doing all the cool things, and we get to learn more about your work. So I think the first thing, just to jump us right in, is I'm wondering, I think this is on people's minds, but can you tell us about bats? They've been in the news, they've been all over the place, but can you just tell us about bats in Central Oregon?
Yeah. So I was really surprised to learn when I first started this job that in the Pacific Northwest in general, we actually have really high bat diversity. We have about 15 different species. They come in a number of shapes and body types and lifestyles. So they're really more diverse than you would expect. We have some specialists, and then we also have some more kind of generalist bats here in Central Oregon. And one thing that is surprising about our bats here is that they're darn near everywhere. I have a hard time going anywhere and not finding bats now that I either know what to look for or now that my job has me out at sunset a lot. And I've just realized that they are sneaky, but they are kind of ubiquitous here in Central Oregon. And we've got some really interesting species in the general area. Spotted bats are particularly unique. They actually have polka dots and giant ears. So they're one of our weirdest looking bat species for sure. We have pallid bats as well, which actually crawl around on the ground to hunt, unlike all of our other bats who do all of their hunting while flying. So really, we've just got some amazing diversity. Part of the reason for that is because of all these different habitat types that we do have. You know, Central Oregon is this convergence of the high desert, the mountains, we've got beautiful meadows. We just have all these different habitat types. And it gives us a pretty amazing amount of diversity in our bat species here.
That's amazing. I mean, I think about bats sometimes when they land on me or not on me, I guess, me or they fly around. But I don't think about the diversity of the bats and all the different kinds. So that kind of gets us right to this point. Can you tell us about the work with the Bat Hub, what the work is, and what you're doing with all these bats?
Yeah, so our biggest project at the Bat Hub, and the one I spent the last 2 summers focused on, is what we call the NA-BAT protocol. And this is actually a national program that we coordinate for the Pacific Northwest. But, you know, bats are incredibly difficult to find. Like, you can find them, but identifying them is tricky. They all kind of look the same when they're out flying around. But it turns out that their echolocation calls are species specific. So what we do is set up microphones to record those echolocation calls and then analyze them to find out what species we have in a given area. So that's our biggest project, and we do that in Oregon, Washington, and starting this year in Idaho as well. Maybe branching out from there, but Oregon and Washington have been our 2 strongholds for the last few years. And we work with a lot of partners on this, but essentially it equates to us driving out, setting up a microphone and a fancy little computer, leaving it out for a night, collecting what data we can, and then moving on to the next spot. And we do this all summer, every summer. So that's kind of the biggest thing, but we have a lot of other projects going on right now. We've got some private contract work that I won't go into detail about because it's private, but we get to use thermal imaging sometimes. We work with the Forest Service on occasion to do hibernacula studies. So we'll go into caves and see if we can find some sleeping bats in the winter. I got to do that this past winter before everything kind of went crazy and shut down, and it was pretty amazing. Let's see, I've got a citizen science project that I'm running where people can actually go out and listen for spotted bats throughout Central Oregon. We work with the national parks. So in a few weeks, I'll be going to Crater Lake and then Lassen. They're doing some thinning down in those parks. So we're going to see how the thinning affects the bat populations and species composition in those areas. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it right now.
Yeah, hardly anything at all. Not busy at all.
Yeah.
So I was hoping you could give us some Bat 101, help us understand. You've mentioned echolocation, you mentioned caves, they're hanging out, they're doing other things. Can you tell us a bit about what is echolocation? Why are bats using it? What are they doing out at night? All of these basic bat things that I should already know.
Absolutely. So I always like to start my bat biology talks by letting people know that bats are evolutionarily kind of strange. They are not closely related to other small mammals. They're not rodents. They're actually more closely related to primates than to rodents or carnivores, um, which is pretty interesting. There was actually a brief period of time where some scientists thought that they were primates, which is kind of fascinating. Um, but yeah, so all of our bats here in North America echolocate, and they do this for a pretty simple reason. If you're going to be nocturnal and you're going to fly, you really need to know where you're going. And that's not to say that bats don't use their eyes. They actually have pretty good vision, and they do use it when there's light available. But their echolocation is really fascinating. They emit these little either clicking or kind of chirping sounds. Usually these are ultrasonic sounds, so they're above the range of human hearing. They're very high frequency, and they send them out in rapid succession. And these sounds then bounce off of objects. And when they bounce off of those objects, they change shape and they change frequency and return to the bat. So it's just like an echo, except on a higher frequency. Um, and when the bat hears these echoes returning, they can interpret the changes in those sounds to understand not only where objects are, but what texture they are and how they're moving. So they can identify everything around them very similarly to how we do with our eyes, but they can do it with sound, which is pretty amazing considering how quickly they move. They're doing this so fast. If you've seen bats out flitting around, they're taking in a lot of information really quickly with these echolocation calls. And as for what they're doing when they're out at night, predominantly a couple of things. They might be migrating. We do have a few migratory species here in the Pacific Northwest. It's very likely that they're out to get food. All of our bats are insectivorous here, so they hunt insects. And if you can imagine trying to fill your belly on something the size of a mosquito, it takes a lot of mosquitoes. So they spend a lot of time and energy hunting. And then also drinking, finding water. Our bats drink, as we say, on the wing. So they don't land and like crawl up to a pond and take a sip. They fly, they scoop down, they take a sip, and they keep going, and they'll do this a couple of times. So those are their kind of three main activities when they're out and about at night.
Very cool. Very cool. You know, I think about that often. How many mosquitoes could a bat consume in an hour in a night to protect me, and also so they are not going hungry.
Exactly.
So I know you have all kinds of things to share in your photos, and I don't want to keep you from that. So I don't know, would you like to just go for it with those, and I'll hold my questions, or?
Sure, yeah. So I've got this first photo up here. I was going to kind of go through a day in the life of someone who's doing that NA bat monitoring that I talked about. So this is kind of what we would wake up to. So we go on 8-day, we call them hitches. So 8-day stints out in the field, and we camp for the most part while we're out there. There are a few occasions when we aren't able to camp, but so we typically wake up in a place that looks hopefully something like this. It's not always quite that pretty. And we start our day by making breakfast and then breaking down camp, and then going and pulling down all of our equipment from the previous night. So you can kind of see in this photo, this is one of my coworkers here, and he is taking down one of our acoustic monitoring setups. So we keep the little computers, the bat detectors, in a nice little ammo box because they're relatively waterproof. And then you can kind of see in this photo there's a microphone mounted on a pole that's attached to that madrone tree. And sometimes we have to use trees to mount them. Sometimes we just stick a piece of rebar in the ground, but we typically have to pull 4 of these setups in the morning. And it often involves mucking around something. Whoop, whoop. Hold on, having technical difficulties. Oh, we'll skip that one. Mucking around in a place like that, and then driving a whole heck of a lot. Hold on one second. Well, my video has decided not to work, which is disappointing, but that's okay. But then we drive for hours upon hours upon hours on roads that look like this, in these enormous trucks that are woefully uncomfortable. And then we go and we set up 4 more detectors. And this is roughly what that looks like. We usually work in teams of 2. This year we're just working as individuals, which is not nearly as much fun, but you know, it is what it is. And this year, since I'm working by myself, for the sake of safety, a lot of us are sleeping inside our vehicles. So this is my little nest that I sleep in. I've got an SUV this year, so I just kind of cozy up in there, nice and safe from all the wild things and, quite frankly, the wild people of certain areas. And oh shoot, I really wanted to play this video. I might save that one for a little bit later. I'm gonna see if I can figure it out in a bit. But yeah. Oh, here we go. I got it. If I can figure out how to share again. There we go.
There, I think we lost your screen.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Do we have it back? Okay, perfect. So last year I was lucky enough to end up at the Klamath Wetland during a glasswing grasshopper swarm, which might not sound super lucky, but I'm a nature nerd, so I was super excited. And my partner and I spent hours upon hours frolicking. Whoops. Oh, geez. Nope. There we go. In the grasshoppers. And I don't know how well you can see them, but there are, oh my God, they're flying. Absolutely millions of them. So sometimes this is what my job looks like. But not always, but often. We get really excited over the tiniest of creatures, to be quite honest. Yeah, oops. And usually at the end of an 8-day hitch, this is what my fingernails and hands end up looking like. It's a lot of hard work. This is not a cushy job by any stretch of the imagination, but personally, I think it's totally worth it. I see some amazing things on a regular basis. Yeah. So I think that's the bulk of my things to share. Oh, this is an interesting project I got to work on recently, and I did take a little video. Let me share my sound, because I did narrate it with this event in mind. I'll go through that real quick.
So this is the basic setup that we have. So you can see two tripods there, and on one we have our thermal infrared camera, and it's on a tripod with a little pivot, and then we have that hooked up to a DVR, so that we don't have to stare in the eye holes the whole thing, and then the DVR actually records what we're seeing so we can watch it later, make sure we didn't miss anything. And then here we have a piece of equipment we use a whole lot. This is one of our specialized microphones. You can see my lovely ingenuity there, getting it set up. And we point those both in the same direction. We'll kind of do that in different areas. Right now I've got them both trained on this section of rock. We'll kind of move them down this cliff face and across over there. And if you can see, we actually have another detector set up over there on the more standard 10-foot pole. So we're doing multiple things at once, trying to cover all of our bases as much as possible. And got my snacks ready to go. Yeah, that's about it. Nothing too exciting so far.
Yeah, snacks are very important.
Agreed. I'm all about the snack. So far, what you've shared, this day in the life of the bat researcher, seems pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me into my next question, which is what got you interested or excited about this bat research, and what keeps you excited about it?
Yeah. Well, I will say I, from a very, very young age, have had a strong fascination with creatures weird, fuzzy, and feisty. Those are kind of my three priorities for the wildlife that I enjoy learning more about. Also how I choose my house pets. So that's what kind of drew me in general to bats, but I actually got super lucky. So I went to OSU Cascades, which a lot of you probably know is a relatively small campus. And I was in the natural resources program there. And when you do that, you end up having the same professors kind of over and over again, and you build relationships with them. And one of the ones that I knew pretty well by the time I graduated was Matt Schinderman. And he actually runs the HERS lab, which is what kind of hosts the Northwest Bat Hub. And he approached me shortly before I was going to graduate and asked me if I was looking for a field job and kind of directed me to the Northwest Bat Hub. And it was my first like full-time, full summer field position. It was a little overwhelming in the beginning, but it was things like this that really caused me to kind of fall in love with it. Especially once we got to do a little bit of mist netting, which is where we actually would capture bats and very briefly handle them. And getting to be so close to them, I got kind of addicted. When someone pulls a bat out of a net and they hold it, first of all, it's just so darn tiny. They're so much smaller than you think they're going to be. And they're just immediately so ready to fight you. They're like, I weigh as much as a quarter, but I will not be pushed around. You know, they're all like teeth and energy. And I found them so endearing and, to be honest, kind of relatable. And that's one thing that kind of keeps me coming back. And then beyond that, bats they're up against a lot, you know, wind turbines and white nose syndrome, and now the kind of attitude shifting because of COVID. There's just a lot working against them, and they're just so important that I kind of was thinking about this last year, and I'm like, I would not mind spending the rest of my career focused on bats and learning about them and conserving them, because they're relatable and just super important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have a couple of questions, one that you and I had brought up, and then also from a couple folks watching. One is about COVID and bats, and if you have any thoughts on, you know, that whole arena, and is it likely for bats to bring other things, and why are bats the villain, and all of these things. And then the other question that is maybe a bit, has a bit more background, is about white nose syndrome and what what the landscape of that is like in Oregon and where things are currently.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing that needs to be understood in regards to the relationship between bats and diseases such as COVID is that bats have a very different relationship with diseases than we do. Their immune systems are almost nothing like ours. When they get a virus, they don't fight the virus, they live with it. Their body doesn't get affected the same way that ours does. So when people say that bats carry a lot of diseases, they're not wrong. They do. Whereas we are better at fighting off funguses and bacteria, bats are better at just dealing with viruses. We all kind of have our strengths and our weaknesses. Now that being said, bats do not pose some like inherent disease threat to all of us, especially here in Central Oregon, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that our bats are not hanging out in huge groups. They're not creating these like pools of, contamination or disease. They are fairly well spread out. I've walked the entire length of Lava River Cave during hibernation season and found 8 bats. Like, they are not sociable. It's not these groups of 10,000 that you kind of picture when you picture hibernating bats. They're spread out, they're keeping to themselves. They want absolutely nothing to do with you, or any of us, not singling you out. They want nothing to do with me either. And really, if you're not interacting super closely with bats, the likelihood of getting any disease from them is extraordinarily low. One thing that people like to kind of point the finger at bats for is rabies. And yes, rabies are one of the kind of notorious carriers of rabies. They do get it, but there are extraordinarily few instances of bats passing rabies onto humans. And when they do, it's almost always humans like me who have gone out and captured them for the sake of research, which is why bat researchers get rabies vaccines, because we know this risk. So with that, I'm just going to do a little PSA. Never, ever, ever touch a bat. If you find one, call a professional. Don't touch them. It's certainly not with your bare hands. If you find a diseased bat, stay away from it, because there is inherent risk there. That's why people shouldn't have bats as pets anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, it's a problem in other countries. It's why we shouldn't eat them. Like, there's just a lot of reasons to kind of admire them from a distance. And then in regards to white nose syndrome, so just a little background for those who might not have heard of this. It's a disease that was first accidentally brought over from Europe. It's a fungus that bats in Europe have been kind of coexisting with for probably quite a long time, but it was unfamiliar to our bats here in the US, and it started on the East Coast and just kind of ravaged the populations of bats in the East. Part of the reason for that is because those bats do congregate in those really large numbers. There can be caves with tens of thousands of bats. They can migrate, so it can spread that way pretty easily. We also have a little bit of an issue with people going into these caves, getting the fungus on their clothing, their shoes, their hands, and then going into another cave. And so it's kind of spread that way really intensely across the eastern half of the US. It has started to pop up in the western US. It's not spreading nearly as quickly, and we can thank the antisocial nature of our bats for that. It's been confirmed, I know, at least the fungus itself, if not the actual infection, has been confirmed in California and Washington. So it's probably just a matter of time. I think I may have read that it was also found in Colorado recently. So it is an increasing concern. It's part of the reason that we do what we do. We've actually developed some new protocols that may help us to identify white nose syndrome outbreaks using year-round acoustic monitoring to try to see. There's a kind of hypothesis that the fungus, because it grows in their noses and in their respiratory system. And if you can imagine trying to sleep when you've got a really bad sinus infection, I would imagine it's kind of like that. It's going to be hard to sleep. You're going to be irritated. You're going to wake up. So we think that bursts of winter activity may be signs that bats are infected with white nose syndrome. So we're going to start to try to monitor more in the winters as well to try to kind of pinpoint white nose and see if we can at least track its spread before it gets out of control. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's such a round answer. Which made me think of another question. And you are doing your bat field surveys during the summer. And you just mentioned the wintering of bats. Could you tell us a little bit about what the seasonality of bats is and what they're doing in the winter versus what they're doing in the summer?
Absolutely. So bats in general are, at least here in the Pacific Northwest, are hibernating in the winter. So they are finding a cozy place, probably with few other individuals, to kind of nestle up and stay protected while it's super cold out, because they are so small and they have such fast metabolisms that they would burn through their energy really quickly if they were trying to be out flying around in the winter. In addition to the fact that the insects aren't out, so they have no food sources during the winter. So typically they're hibernating, and this is more than just sleep. It's kind of beyond sleep. Like I mentioned, I got to kind of do a hibernaculum survey this past winter, and we had to swab the bats because we were testing them for white nose, and they don't even move. They don't acknowledge that you're there. They're out like little rocks just hanging from the wall. It's very funny. They hang on by one little foot, and when you swab them, they kind of sway back and forth like a little pendulum, and that's about it. So they're out cold in the winter. In the spring, the mothers will give birth to pups. It depends on the species, but I think a lot of them, May, June time is when they give birth. And it's those pregnant and nursing mamas that are really doing the heavy lifting when it comes to eating mosquitoes. They can eat their own body weight every single day to try to support themselves and their young, which is very impressive. So if you just think about trying to fly with that big old belly and then trying to catch enough mosquitoes to fill your entire body weight, they're doing a whole lot of work. My heart goes out to the pregnant mama bats. We're shaped like peanuts, by the way. It's super cute. And then, they spend their summer foraging, mating's in the fall, foraging, drinking water, living life, not doing too terribly much. In the fall, some of them will migrate to warmer areas or just to areas that they prefer for hibernation. And then this is when they actually do their mating for a lot of species. Not all. We've got 15. I don't know every single one of them, but a lot of them mate in the fall, and the females will actually sometimes store their sperm over the winter and then kind of self-inseminate in the spring, which is pretty interesting. There are a few other species that do similar things, which is fascinating. So they're waiting for the right time and not dealing with the dads when they're actually pregnant, which is interesting. Yeah.
So the bats are just doing their thing. We had planned this bat night in the summertime because that's when it's nice outside and you're probably going to be able to see them flying around catching those mosquitoes, or you'll be able to hear them. So my next question is all about finding bats. What kind of habitat do they like? Where to go? Where not to go? All of those questions about how can you know it's a bat, and if you're looking for one, you want to experience it, what to do.
Yeah. So the number one thing to find bats is to find water that they are likely to be able to drink from. That's kind of our go-to when we're looking for bats. And the rule of thumb is that if the water is calm enough to have a reflection, then a bat is likely to drink from it, or they're able to drink from it. If you think about kind of a swiftly moving river, that has waves and turbulence, so a bat could get swallowed up by the water while it was trying to drink. So we generally focus on those really still bodies of water. One thing I wouldn't recommend is trying to like sit outside a cave or under a bridge. I've had very little luck in those places. A lot of our bat species roost in like under tree bark or in old buildings, but you're not going to get a spectacular show of bats coming out right at sunset. Cliffs are a really good place to find bats. In particular, our spotted bats really love dramatic landscapes, rocky cliffs. I was actually doing a spotted bat auditory survey the other night, and I was in the Dry Canyon in Redmond, just kind of sitting near one of the little cliffs, and it's maybe like a 20-foot cliff there. And at about 9:45, bats started popping out of that cliff, which was pretty cool. I like to try to position myself so that I have a good view of the lightest part of the sky, because then you're actually going to be able to see that contrast between the dark body and the light sky. It can be hard to know if you're looking at a bat or a bird, but the one giveaway is the way that they fly. So birds fly essentially with their arm bones. So it's a lot more rigid. They've essentially got one point of articulation, maybe two if you count the shoulder. But bats are actually flying with their fingers. So it's skin stretched between their fingers, and they can articulate all of their fingers just like we would. And so they fly very differently. It's less soaring, it's quicker movements. It always looks a little bit spastic. Even when it seems they're on a mission, they still seem to be kind of jumping around. So that's kind of the easiest way to tell if you're looking at a bird or a bat, but honestly, it's not the easiest thing sometimes.
So then you mentioned like 9:45. Is there a better time than other times to be sitting and waiting for the bats?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what you're looking at. So I was sitting below a cliff that they were roosting in. So I was there at what we call the end of civil twilight. Scientists break up the light and the day into different categories. There's daylight, there's darkness, and then in between there's civil twilight, nautical twilight, and something else. And it's that nautical twilight time that seems to be the best for viewing bats. It lasts, right now it's about half an hour a night, I think maybe 45 minutes. It's when it's starting to get dark, but there's just enough light that you can still see. And that is when they're all waking up and going out to do their thing. After that, they will still be out and about, but you're not going to be able to see them unless it's like a full moon and a beautifully clear night and you have a wide open area above you, then maybe. But that's kind of what I would call the best time. They're waking up, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're especially frenetic at that time of night.
Very, very neat. I'm also hungry when I wake up, so it makes sense. So I've got a question here, but before we move to a couple more questions, I just wanted to give folks a reminder that if you have any questions or a specific question even about bats, feel free to post it in the chat or the comments. Then if you are not yet a member but would like to support the Land Trust conservation work or would like to learn more about bats, we have quite a bit of information on our website, so feel free to check it out there. You can also become a member. So do post those questions. The next question coming up from Linda, maybe. is how long do the pups stay with their mothers?
That is funny. I was actually just looking this up earlier today. And it obviously depends on the species. I was looking at big brown bats, which are some of our biggest bats here in Central Oregon, and the pups will stay with the mom for about a month at the longest. So not a super long time. Their babies are not as helpless as ours from the get-go, and they can learn to fly pretty quickly. And once they've learned to fly, they might hang out near mom for a little while, but they won't necessarily follow her everywhere she goes or depend on her as much. They might just kind of roost in the same area for a little while after that, maybe for their first season, because they don't want to have to go find a new place to roost that first summer. But after that, they're adults. They're grown and ready to go.
A month is not long, yeah. The next question I have is, do you have a favorite bat and why?
Oh gosh. There are so many cool bats. There are these little, they're down in South America, and I've never gotten to see them in person, but hopefully one day. There's a species called the Hardwick's woolly bat. And these little guys will actually crawl inside of pitcher plants, which are carnivorous plants. And they'll kind of roost inside the plant. And then when insects are attracted to the scents that that plant is giving off, it'll steal the insects from the plant. So not only do they have this nice little house that's got a roof on it so they don't get rained on, but they also get like free snacks. So I think that's pretty darn cool. My favorite Central Oregon species is the silver-haired bat, partly because every picture you see of them, they just look a little crazy and ridiculous. And they've got this really dark, they're kind of that classic black bat, but then with a little silver tip on the fur on their back. And their Latin name translates to something like dark furred night wanderer. So I don't know, there's something really lovely about that. Yeah, so those are my top two probably.
They sound like good bats.
Yeah.
Stephen is asking, so you mentioned turbines earlier, the wind, and the question here is, are there things that some of those turbines do to protect bats? Could there be more measures taken? Maybe just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so from what I know, and I've never done research specifically on turbines or their effects, but there are a few species that are more susceptible to getting injured by wind turbines than others. One of them is the hoary bat. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what the other one is, but there are things being done to mitigate these problems. I actually know a woman who's working right now on a project to develop these little noisemakers that make ultrasonic frequencies that the bats can hear that deter them. And what they intend to do is put those on the tips of the blades of the wind turbines, and they would be going off whenever the turbine is spinning and hopefully keeping bats away from those turbines. In addition, the wind energy companies are working with bat researchers to try to make sure that they're not putting up new turbines in migration corridors or in areas where we know we have a really important kind of population of a given species. So there are things being done. There's certainly always more that could be done, but it's really hard. I don't know if you've ever actually walked up to one of those turbines. They're enormous. They're so much bigger than I thought they were. So it's not an easy thing to keep bats from flying into them. You can't, put a giant net around it. For a while I was picturing, those old-fashioned fans with a little metal cage. I'm like, just throw some metal cages around them. But I don't think that would work. So it's an issue that's being thought about by a lot of people. And the wind energy companies are motivated perhaps for a lot of reasons, but one thing that I would think would motivate them to continue to contribute financially to research would be that if bats start getting put on the endangered species list, that would really limit what these energy companies are able to do. So there is a partnership going on. There's an annual conference every year regarding wind energy and bats. So people are working on it.
Thank you, and thanks, Steve, for that question. Another one, before we kind of close out, we've got maybe 10 more minutes here, but the next question is a bit about endangered species and bats and what is happening in Oregon, but also, are there endangered species of bats that we should know about? Seems to be the question.
Okay. So we don't have any endangered species here in the Pacific Northwest of bats. We do have some sensitive species. The Townsend's big-eared bat is considered a species of concern in the area. The hoary bat is another one that we have here that people are concerned about as well. I believe the little brown bat is also having some issues currently. So those are the three that come to mind immediately. And I'm going to be super honest, I've been really focused on Pacific Northwest bats for the past 3 years. And while I have some knowledge of bats elsewhere, I don't know a whole lot about other endangered bat species. I mean, I think I heard that the bumblebee bat, which is the world's smallest bat, is endangered.
We'll have to look.
Yeah.
We can find answers.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yeah, the hoary bat is one of my favorite ones. But
that pin right now.
Oh, really? That's great. This one might have a quick answer. If not, we can sort it out afterwards. But the question is about identifying bats and if there's any good tool that you would recommend, like a guidebook or a way to learn your local bats. Do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, so if you're talking about trying to identify bats out in the wild, I can tell you there's one tool available that I know of, and it's actually a little device that you can plug into your phone, and it will pick up those echolocation calls, and it sometimes will be able to tell you a species, which is really cool. The last I checked, it was only available for iPhone, but that may have changed. I haven't looked into it in a while. I am lucky enough that I can borrow equipment from my lab when I'm curious, and I have definitely set up detectors in my backyard. Just for fun. If you're trying to like visually identify bats, you're just not going to be able to because you're not going to get that close to them. There are a few that are super distinct that you would know if you saw them. One of them is the spotted bat. It is the only bat you'll ever find with polka dots in North America. The biggest bat is in the Pacific Northwest is the big brown bat, and those guys are pretty distinct because they're large and they have more like puppy-like faces. I actually have a poster behind me. You can kind of see, it's called Bats of the Pacific Northwest. You can buy it online and I highly recommend it. It talks a little bit about their ecology and it shows a picture of each of our 15 species. So that's fairly handy. If you wanted to get really crazy about it and start doing your own like hobby acoustic monitoring, there is a relatively inexpensive device called an SM4 bat. It's produced by Wildlife Acoustics, and you could totally buy one of those and set it up in places that you're curious about. Yeah, those would kind of be my top recommendations.
Thanks. Well, as we close things out, we're getting close to the end. I have just 2 final questions. And the first one is, what is something that people need to know about Central Oregon bats that you just need to make sure that you can tell people?
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on it a little bit, but bats are just so much more important than the average person might realize they are keeping you from being eaten alive by mosquitoes. They are protecting our crops and, quite frankly, allowing you to eat organic should you choose to do so. They're important to both ecology and agriculture. And they're not these creepy, gross creatures that people often portray them as. I know you earlier mentioned that scene in The Office where a bat lands on Meredith's head. And there's a lot of scenes like that in shows that I otherwise completely love. And I'm like, no, you don't need to panic or be grossed out if you get near a bat. They're really magnificent little creatures. And I would hope that people would, I assume everyone came to this talk because they already appreciate bats. So maybe I'm preaching to the choir. But just acknowledge how much bats do for you, and maybe kind of think about thanking them, but also recognize that they don't want your thanks and they don't need it and they don't want anything to do with you.
And then my last one comes from the fact that you are the volunteer coordinator for the Northwest Bat Hub. And so that means that there are ways that people can get involved. So if folks are interested in bats, obviously this year is slightly different than years past, and things are changing, but you have this community science project. So could you tell folks a bit, just in closing, how they could get involved and where they could learn more about your projects, and where to go from here?
Absolutely. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again because I came prepared for this question. Let's see here. So yes, the Spotted Bat Project is our citizen science project. And what we do is we take advantage of some really unique biology. So as I mentioned, most bats echolocate at an ultrasonic frequency, so above the range of human hearing. You may occasionally hear them, but it's not a very distinct sound. However, with spotted bats, they actually echolocate within the range of human hearing. It's a very distinct noise once you kind of learn to listen for it. And that actually contributes to us having a hard time using our fancy technology to find them, because our technology is geared towards those ultrasonic frequencies. So we ask the public to go out to some designated survey locations and listen for spotted bats. It's a 3-month project every summer, June, July, and August. And we have 120 different locations that we're trying to get surveyed, which is a really tall order. In an ideal world, each of those would be surveyed every month in June, July, and August. We are working on building up a volunteer base. As of right now, we've got maybe 10 people working on it. Hopefully we'll have closer to 50 by the end of the summer, but we could always use more. So my contact info and the website for that project are up on the screen. Please feel free, if you're interested or you know someone who's interested or a group that might want to get involved with this, reach out to me. If you volunteer, you'll be in regular contact with me anyways. But it's a really amazing project. It's an hour a night when you want to go out. Like, it's a really low-key commitment if you want to do it. We have an online version of our training available. The past years we have trained folks in person. That was not available, although we have gotten the go-ahead to do one-on-one trainings. So if somebody did want to come out, I actually have an OSU student coming out with me tomorrow night to conduct a survey together so that she can feel confident knowing what to listen for. But yeah, so it's very fun. It'll take you to some places you might not have been before in Central Oregon, which is like half the joy of it. And it's a really lovely time to be out in nature as well. It's during that nautical twilight time that I mentioned. You almost always end up seeing something cool. The other night I scared the dickens out of this poor little raccoon. You just end up seeing really cool things. I didn't even know there was a comet coming through, and I was like, oh, I see a comet, like, because I'm out at night in the darkness. Like, it's just, I don't know. I think it's a really cool opportunity, and I'm constantly and shamelessly recruiting for it.
Super. Well, I'm sure you'll get some signups today. So thank you, Sarah, for sharing all this information, and folks who have questions that you think of late at night about bats. Sarah has gotten back to me about these questions that I've had, and it's excellent. So you have her contact information, and I've posted the link there to the Spotted Bat Project in the chat, so you can learn more about that. Again, thank you so much for joining in, and folks who are joining online, thanks for calling in. We hope you'll tune in again and learn more about other pieces of nature in Central Oregon from the comfort of your own home. You can subscribe to our newsletter to find out about the upcoming virtual events we'll have, or you can check out our upcoming Deschutes Land Trust virtual events at our website, deschuteslandtrust.org. And that's also where you can become a member. So thanks again. We'll see you all again soon. And I hope you get out and listen for some bats. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.